The first item is Senate Bill 1251. This is relating to lease extensions on public lands.
Aloha, Chair Kahele and Chair Dela Cruz and members. My name is Jocelyn Doan. I'm the Public Policy Manager at the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. I'm here on behalf of our trustees who oppose Senate Bill 1251, which would authorize extensive lease extensions for a variety of public land leases, which would allow a single entity indefinite lease lengths for terms and possibly rents far longer and lower than necessary for redevelopment purposes. Act 149, which this is purportedly meant to model, which was passed just last year, established a 10-year pilot project that allows for 40-year lease extensions for certain types of leases in a particular geographic region, has barely even started, nevertheless been evaluated. So some of the things that we'd like to see when that pilot moves is what the cost-benefit analysis is between the state and the private entity, and whether or not 40 years is necessary for improvements. More importantly, even ignoring the geographic expansion, SB 1251 would grant BLNR far more discretion to grant lease extensions, so much so that it would dwarf the authorities granted to BLNR in Act 149, making it absolutely unnecessary. Specifically, SB 1251 would not limit the maximum aggregate of term leases, so a 40-year commercial lease that gets an extension for 65 years under existing law could get an additional 40 years for a total aggregate of 105 years. Act 149 limited the extension so that there was a total aggregate of 40 years. This bill does not do that. It would not limit the number of extensions that a lease could be granted. So this 105-year lease could eventually be re-extended for another 40 years, and then another 40 years, et cetera. This bill does not limit the extensions to the extent necessary to qualify for mortgage lending or guarantee purposes or other financing purposes. And there's a number of other conditions in Act 149 in terms of the use of the property that are not found in this current bill. So we'd urge the committee to hold this bill so we can see the results of the pilot program that you just passed last year. Minimally, if the committee moves this bill, we would ask you to adopt a maximum aggregate, adopt the number of extensions that could be granted, limit the purposes of an extension for financing purposes, prohibit lease extensions that exceed a percentage of the useful life of improvements made. So that way the state gets some sort of value at the end of the lease, because right now improvements generally go back to the state. That's how the leases work. And finally, 40 years on top of 65 years is more than a century. And we all know that in Hawaii, within 100 years ago, we've seen dramatic different political changes. Hawaii's only going to be 60 years. The state's only going to be 60 years this year. So we ask that you limit the extensions to a far shorter period of time. And our testimony gives an example of 15 to 20 years. Mahalo.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Yeah, we can after. Let's see. For Laulima Pahoa, testifying in opposition. For the Kalapa Community Association, in opposition. Na'aukoa, in opposition. Ka'ohana Onapua, in opposition. Ohana Ho'opakele, in opposition. Hilo Fish Company, Kerry Omomoto, in support. And the Kanoilahua Industrial Area Association, in support. And then to summarize, the rest of them are all individuals. We have 114 that opposed, 145 late testimony in opposition, and 1 with comments. And in the interest of time for the rest of the agendas that we have, I'm not going to read all the names, but those are the totals that have come in. Hi, Russell.
So G for DLNR.
So this is a governor's package bill, right? This is submitted on behalf of DLNR.
Yes.
And so, I find it odd that historically DLNR has not taken this position in terms of its public lands and how it disposes its public lands. Last year, frankly, we had to fight tooth and nail to get Act 149 for the Hilo Economic District. We didn't have the support of DLNR on that. It seems like a total reversal from last year, and I have to tend to agree with OHA that it takes out many of the things that we put in Act 149, like the opportunity for the general public to express an interest in a property 10 years prior to its auction or its lease termination date. You know, we give the public an opportunity to express interest in a particular parcel. So can you, and I read your testimony and you commented on a version of the House draft that changed and why you opposed that bill. So I'm confused because I'm getting conflicting messages from the Land Division.
If you recall, Senator, when we looked at last year's bill, we were focusing on what it changed. And last year they changed it because they had the extension. You can go 40 years. I think what you're talking about the 10-year, prior 10 years and having public comment, that was passed the prior year, I believe, the year before. So at the end of the day, last year's bill, really the new stuff was the extension, ability to extend for an additional 40 for Hilo only. And so we were focusing on that act as the change. And so that was really the gist of our bill. And we thought if the ledge, hearing the ledge and seeing the ledge pass it, the governor even went along with it and signed it, that if that's where it's okay to extend leases beyond the 65, then we just felt maybe it should be broader than Hilo and apply to statewide. But, and secondly, we looked at the conditions and we thought, well, we added some conditions that we thought we could get behind and support, such as not transferring it. And the idea was not transferring it because, oftentimes, if you go from 2 years remaining on a lease to 40, and as soon as you get the 40, you turn around and sell it, it's all of a sudden you get that value, and the state never really recovered any of that. Yeah. So that was.
You note that in your testimony, the potential for speculation, but
and
you don't provide any situations of speculation. We had a bill several years ago that did this exact thing for some of the hotel resort properties around the state, and we didn't see that happen. So what are you referring to when you talk about the potential for lessee speculation? Or is that just your opinion?
No, I've actually seen leases turnover. I'm not, as far as the hotel resorts, I haven't seen those turnover, but other smaller leases have turned over since getting an extension. Yeah, and that one I'm referring to, not the 40, not last year's bill, but earlier there was a 10-year extension granted, I don't know, several years ago. A lot of people took advantage of it, and a lot of the smaller properties turned over at least once.
Of the total public lands inventory that exists throughout the state, what is that total acreage? And what I want to know is the total acreage of public lands versus what percentage of that is classified as commercial, industrial, and luxury resort of the total percentage of the public land inventory.
Under our jurisdiction,
sure.
A very, very small, minute percentage. We have 1.3 million acres of state land. A lot of it is, as we know, aside from being mountains or forest reserves and stuff, is set aside to a lot of government agencies.
Right.
So the urban core, like even in Hilo, DOT, harbors, and airports has a huge, they have the commercial harbor, they have all the industrial spaces over there. Over here in Honolulu, same thing. DOT harbors has all that place along limits.
But what's the percentage of revenue-generating lands that fall under the purview of the Land Division at DLNR that this bill would directly address?
We never really calculated that percentage, but it would address the industrial-type leases. And aside from Kanoa Lehua, we have a few industrial-type leases on outer islands. Not too many, a few in Kona, a few in Kauai. Our big industrial park out in Sand Island has we have one lessee, a master lessee in Sand Island, and they have about 100 different subleases under there.
So, that's information I'd like to have.
A few hundred leases.
Can you provide that information? And so basically the percentage of commercial, industrial, and classified luxury resort to the overall land portfolio, and then can you also
as far
provide
as acreage, via acreage kind of thing,
or the percentage of the total portfolio?
We can provide some.
And then the amount of revenue generated from those lands, broken down into those three subcategories.
Okay.
Commercial, industrial, well, one category, and then hotel resort.
We don't have a whole lot of resorts. That's
So it should be easy then to come up with the number. Okay. And then what's the difference? I mean, based on that portfolio, what percentage is seeded versus non-seeded? You know, OHA obviously has a vested interest in our seeded
There's a lot of
inventory.
individual leases, probably smaller acres that are, like Big Island, for example, is seeded. Okay. Sun Island is not seeded. That's close to 100 acres. Yeah.
Seated, it's not public land trust.
Okay, it's not public land trust proceeds. So, but yeah, that's so.
So you can
Otherwise,
provide
majority
that.
of the lands are going to be seeded. So in Hilo, they're all seeded. Majority of the Kona, very likely. I'm not sure. I can't speak on that. You're gonna have to check.
Okay.
But Kauai and stuff like that will be seeded.
Okay, sorry, Senator Agra. You have a question?
Yeah, I'm more interested in your testimony. You talked about removal of existing improvements at the end of the lease. What were you referring to?
Your question was, are we referring to removal of existing improvements?
At the end of the lease, so
Yeah.
the lease ends, before you lease it out again, you remove improvements?
Under the current standard form that we use for leases and general leases, it does allow the board to make a determination at the end of the term whether the lessee has to remove the improvements or just let it stand and we'll take it over. We're finding a lot of the older leases doesn't have that provision, and therefore, i.e., we have the situation of Uncle Billy's, where you have a building that's cost $10 million to remove, and has a lot of asbestos and stuff. I'll give an example. Another one that we're looking to, we took it over. We did it. Let the tenant. The tenant, I think, had an old lease that didn't have the provision for removal. We took over the building, and we're looking to renovate it, but a big cost, and maybe use it for our office space, needed office space. It is costing the state more money because of the hazardous materials in there that's got to be cleaned out before we can have it. So current form does give the board the discretion to let it stay or have it removed.
And that's the purpose of, for these extended leases, you actually extend it. The new leases would actually include the current language.
Yeah. So, a lot of the leases are old.
Chair.
Senator Agra?
Yeah, so Act 149 was a pilot, a 10-year pilot. What were the results of your negotiation? What have you done with the Hilo community to justify now expanding it statewide, your authorization?
Has held meetings up there, and we have not received yet an application, but it's only been a year or not even a year. But we understand some tenants are working on their applications and their plans.
So what is the justification for expanding before seeing the evaluation results of how well it went with this restrictive extension process?
We just thought that if the legislature's wishes to allow extensions beyond the 65, by limiting it to Hilo, you raise the issue of what some will say is special legislation issue, which could be a constitutional issue. But by making it statewide, you eliminate any, the concern for that. If the policy was to allow beyond 65, the bill last year, 149, was not an administrative package bill, but we looked at it as being an indication of where perhaps the state is looking to go towards on a wider project.
So another question in these extensions, your process when you go out for leases, I guess, would include community input so that adverse impacts on the surrounding community could come up, and if there's any new developments which this lease extension would include, then you would get the input, and so any lessee would have to go through that. I don't see that in the lease renewal process. Only criteria seems to be look after sea level rise. I don't see any look at adverse considerations and address them. Would that be in the process? It's not here.
A lot of those provisions that have protections for those are already built in the law.
Okay,
Because,
but
for example, our meetings are public, so that's for sure, our land board meetings. But more importantly, the issue of 343 will come up, possibly, and it has to be analyzed of whether EA or EIS needs to be done. Together, if triggered, that will require a series of public meetings and opportunity for comment.